Everyone's got the Wi-Fi? We good? All right, so pay attention to me. Now, who got to see Zed's talk? Excellent. So it was awesome. Zed had this wonderful slide. Right at the end, he said, take a train ride and it grants you serendipity. I thought that's brilliant, so I took a train ride and had someone stole my laptop. Always, whatever we say on stage, put it through your own filter. And just don't take everything we say at face value. But I thought it was really interesting. It was like, so I had my stuff stolen, and so I started making mental notes because I didn't have any paper either. Of the differences, so the similarity between the theft and production outage, and production is kind of the topic of today. So when stuff is stolen, on my flight from London to Prague, I did some work and I committed stuff in a Git, beautiful commits, lovely, and they're gone. So that's pretty special. I don't know the last time I did a time machine backup. So I don't know how many photos are on my phone versus the gap versus whenever I did time machine. So there's a space in my life where I don't know what my children look like anymore, which is good. And I could have lost my presentation slides. Fortunately, I had Dropbox. And fortunately, yeah. So and the time that I spent yesterday. So who spoke? Any speakers here who spoke yesterday afternoon? Sorry, I wasn't here. I was at the police station, and that's awesome. So that's a great way. You get to visit a city. I mean, you should visit a police station. No one ever does that. This is the inside of Bruno's police station. It wasn't special. It's not a tourist hotspot. Don't go there. And I would rather be writing code. Very similar to an outage where servers are stolen from you, or VMs, or disks, or networking, or processors, or just bad things. You may lose persistent disk. Who's ever hosted something on US East 1? It's awesome, isn't it? And perhaps less aware, you might lose data that's in flight, so requests that are happening, and it's less likely that you know exactly the consequence of losing processes. Just the time lost restoring a production system, the time then lost. Your first job is to get it back up, right? And then at the same time, you're probably collecting, right, what the hell's actually going on, and after it's back up, then you'll go and do diagnostic, and then you'll go and produce some sort of postmortem with the implicit promise this will never happen again. Until next time. And the whole time, you would rather be writing code. So I combined the two because I'm a professional, and so I managed to find the offered serendipity because I looked really, really fucking hard. It was in there somewhere. So just a bit of background on me. So I was born in 2008 for brevity, and it's nothing else interesting happened before that. I got married, but that's not relevant. You can't have her. She's mine. So I did web consultancy, and so I liked writing apps, which is where I come from when I shared the rest of the talk. I liked writing apps, and other people did design, and other people did ops. The web, it ran on the internet somewhere. I don't know where. It wasn't interesting to me. And none of our customers, sadly, I'm not sure if it was our fault or not, but they were never really truly successful. So let's not talk about that. But it was interesting. One of them was successful, and we started to experience the pains of ops. And so I actually decided to stop doing the consulting because, just because your own business doesn't mean that's what you should do. And I thought I'd go and work at a company. So I joined a company called Engine Yard. They do, I call it hosting, but that's not very cool at the moment. People call it platform as a service, but we can call it hosting. And so of primarily Rails, Ruby on Rails applications, PHP, and so it became interesting. Like I said, I started as an app person. And I kind of came in thinking, you know what? I don't need to know how you do DevOps and ops. There are people for that. I've been there for 2 years, and I know a lot. And I'm not all that thrilled knowing this stuff. But I'm very empathetic now to people who do ops, people who do complete app ownership around DevOps, and not very empathetic to people who ignore it, because that just means you've never had a production system. Because what you come to figure out eventually is that you can't just put a line and call it a platform as a service. If you've ever put apps on Heroku or Engineer and you think, yes, I don't need to know any of that anymore, that just means you haven't scaled yet. Because eventually you need to find bottlenecks, and they're somewhere through the entire stack. You need to find bugs, and they're somewhere through the entire stack. So you eventually realize, I need to know what's going on. And a lot of what I want to talk about is visibility, but also you're going to have to start making some changes. So this talk is about you evolving from a developer into the owner of a production system. So when the title of the talk says the future of deployment, really it's about your future of deployment, because you're all going to be somewhere now, and as your app grows up, it's not about you as a person. I'm not that interested about you. You're all lovely. Look at you. You're very pretty. Look around. But I'm more interested in the thing called a production system and your relationship to it. All right, so just finished the story about me. I figured out there was a website that sort of aggregated Git repos from all over GitHub. And it didn't put the number. It was like a year ago. But if you did a little bit of JavaScript, you could figure out how many GitHub repos you had contributed to in some fashion. And a year ago, it was 256. So I don't know. I just decided it's probably about 300 now. I don't want to say that I urinate on projects like a dog. But I haven't found a better metaphor yet. So that's the one we're going to go with. I look at everything. And while I'm there, I fix it. It could be the README or whatever it is. I really enjoy participating in everyone else's projects. Then, obviously, I've started doing a lot of Chef. That's what we use at Engineer. Bosch, which I'll talk about. SM, which is a sort of a shell Ruby way of describing system components. And ultimately, I became fascinated by the idea that just as I was able to ignore 300 projects, trust me, when you've modified 300 projects, you learn to ignore all of them. My favorite GitHub feature was when they came out with turn off notifications. And there was a big button that said, turn off all of them. And that was like, woohoo, what a great day. Including all of mine. I don't want to know about them anymore. I've moved on. But production systems, somehow they're different from just repos. And I don't know that we think about it this way. So let's do a quick test. What's the difference between 300 static GitHub repos and 300 running production systems? One of them has an ignore button, and the other one has customers. And they're very hard to ignore because, they give you money, hopefully, and luckily for some of them will tell you when things aren't working. And if you're unlucky, they don't tell you. It's not the best relationship to have with your customer, where you sort of say, here, see what's wrong with this. That's kind of not where they're at, on the whole. They'd rather it worked, and you didn't give them shit. So, as you've probably figured out, you can give them some bad code initially, when it's just in the first round of customers, and we call it early adopters. It's important to give these things fancy names. But when you're calling them early adopters, what you're really doing is shipping crap. So, but you gave it a good name, and as more traffic comes in, things change, and you're going to have to change your relationship to that production system. Bit of a metaphor, because I like metaphors. So static code, a bit like the books on your bookshelf. Very pretty. You can sort of look how clever I am for owning all these. Well, not owning. Look at all the books I borrowed from people and never gave back. One of the two. But web apps are a bit like all the people at your company. Books are lovely. People suck. They're very simple. All right, very easy to understand the differences there. And not you. You're lovely people. Other people. Look around you. They all suck. So I've done a longer version of this, and I sort of introduced how I got to this thought. But I kind of came to this realization that we as developers, it's me, you, we don't think of ourselves in relationship to the production system. So we think of ourselves in this fashion. We write code. The conference is the strongly typed scripting language. Strongly scripting. What's the name of the conference? Not RuPy. What's strongly? Right. Nothing to do with production systems. All right. We like things like syntax highlighting. What the colors really change the output of the HTTP requests. So I had this kind of thought that eventually because I've tried to convince people for years to change some of their the choices they make. Particularly, and the JRuby guys are here, I've spent a number of years trying to educate Ruby people to stop using the Ruby that is made by the Ruby people, which was built as a scripting language, object-oriented Perl and things like that, and to use one that's perhaps, built to run for a long period of time in a sort of stable, efficient fashion that you'll be happy with, which is JRuby. And found it very hard to convince these people to do that. And I eventually decided that what was going on was they were developers who had an unfortunate career choice where they'd chosen a career where the unfortunate outcome of their code was it went into production. Much better. I mean, there's that point in your life where you can no longer just keep flushing the database. It's a sad day. It's no longer code, it's now a production system, and your code is more like one of the ways you can modify it. And I don't know that we think about this. So I just want to give a quick introduction to production systems, because you've all never really thought about them, so I'm going to give a very thorough, well-documented description of what a production system is, so we're all on the same page. All right, so here's a production system. It's a box with traffic. All right, we all got that now? All right, we're all on the same page. Now, traffic does come in some various different forms. And some of these ideas do come from a book called Release It, and I'll show you the picture of that. But yes, he sort of describes that certain traffic might come in impulses, others might come in massive amounts of stress. And the question is, what happens to your system? And I'm pretty confident that you don't use the words impulses and stress in your source code. So already we're not thinking about production when we write code. Now, I don't really want to spend this time talking about how you can write your app differently, so much as we're going to think about tools that live around you. To tolerate these ideas. Other ways that things that change your app that might cause problems is you might actually change the source code. I mean, we do it all the time, but every time you change the source code, every time you do a deployment, every time you change part of the stack, something's probably going to go wrong. And each of these things add up. And the way they add up is because there's not just your app, there's your app, there's perhaps another part of your app which is doing background work, then there's things that you don't really think about as your app. Quick raise of hands, who's ever read the source code to Redis? 2 people. Right. Who uses Redis? Probably a better question. All right, far more hands. Who's ever read the source code to Postgres? It's not the same 2 people. So at least I got that. I feel a lot better. Yet these are part of your production system. Who's ever read the source code to your own app? Anyway, don't worry about that. That's just like you might call that an app. Right, but then if you're doing SOA, because that's very popular, because Steve Yegge said so, so now we've got arrows going everywhere. That adds complexity, and with complexity comes problems. That's your internal SOA. Then you're going to perhaps talk to other things. Those other things change over time. One day, all of a sudden, those APIs you've been talking to and forgot about the fact you were talking to them disappear. That's a very exciting day. And that's in a planned fashion, just you weren't paying attention. And then there's other APIs that just subtly change. And that's exciting because you probably didn't keep track of what you assumed was happening when you wrote the code in the first place, let alone what's now happening and why it's broken. And you don't even know the guy that wrote that part. So our relationship with production systems is, I think, a little tortured. Now, yeah, but nonetheless, you have production systems. And I'm not saying you're infantile, this is, somehow, but you've got a mental dashboard in your head. And I just want to quickly introduce you to this some of you may have fancy production dashboards with graphs and color. But every one of us has a mental dashboard of what the current status of our production app is to keep you sane. And it looks a little bit like this. It's either one color or the other. It's not both colors, which is, I did a striped version of this, and it's awful. It really makes you want to vomit. So this is simple, red and green. All right, so either your mental dashboard of what's going on in production is there's something wrong, or is this normal errors? So I just want to, I've tried to think about this lots of different ways to bring it home. And actually the next slide, I think, really summarizes the gist of hopefully some math. If we can get this math, then it's no longer just funny jokes and ugly colors. So if you've got a distributed system, which you do, because you've got your app talking to a database, that's 2 bits. That's distributed. And if you've ever had the database not be there, you'll know what it's like to have never thought about the problem of the app, the database not being there. I mean, I know these things. I don't think still I've ever, even though I've got a slide essentially saying this, I don't think I've ever explicitly asked the question every time I do a database call, is the database there? Like, if it's not, tell you what, I'll do something else. I've personally never handled, even though I know I should, that explicitly handled that scenario. But that happens. It might happen because you're migrating. It might happen just because of an outage. It might happen because, I don't know, you put it on US East. There are reasons that the database is. And so what's interesting is that if you've got a success rate, if you could measure that, as you couple them together, it just gets worse. And that's my base math. All right? And the consequence of that is that the goal of what we have in this talk, the goal of your relationship to your production system, not you as a professional developer. This is not a professional development talk. This is a production development talk. I care about your production system, not you. All right, you are the tool with which I'm going to help it. And the way we're going to help it is you're going to start to figure out ways to at least think about this idea that as traffic increases to your production system, if you don't improve the percentage of success that goes through it, you're just going to get more errors. And it's going to get awful. I believe Engine Yard, which is as a production system, not as a host of apps, but just as itself an app, may have one of the highest number of errors going into airbrake. I'm told. By the airbrake people. So because we have a complex system dealing with complex systems, so perhaps I can justify it, but you can't to some degree. But what I know is once it gets out of hand, it's just too much of a problem for anyone to fix, and you fight against it the whole time. And so this idea of you constantly not just adding features, which I know is what everyone wants. This is me also trying to teach you how to talk to all the other stakeholders, because everyone wants features. Yeah, it's not just you. No one thinks about production system like a person, like a thing that needs feeding and curating and looking after and resources allocated to its constant improvement. But I'm trying to show this idea that this is exactly what your company needs to be allocating time to. Constantly improving as the traffic grows, not just from tomorrow, but as traffic grows, if you're not fighting against that success rate, or conversely the error rate, life is going to get awful for you. And so this is part of, I think, every week's activities is constantly improving your relationship to production and production's lifestyle and well-being, so that when one day your app gets a Twitter account, it only has nice things to say about you. I don't know what that means. It just amuses me. So a quick summary of where we're going to do the next 20 slides we're going to talk about is the idea that as a professional, your job is in part to increase your production happiness, which in turn should actually increase your life as a developer. But immediately, you're going less happy. And I know that because we're at a scripting language conference. And we choose scripting languages because they make us happy. Sadly, those same scripting languages may not make us happy in production. Possibly. I don't want to, I just want to leave that as a thought. I don't want to... So I'm not going to talk about scripting languages. We're going to dance around the topic. Let's never speak about it again until I get to the slide on Go. Let's talk about them as tools. We're going to talk about perhaps there's an idea around what tools we pick that may have been built by you or other people for a particular sort of thought process, and they were trying to solve a problem. Now you're using them, but they come with consequences. And I want to go through, they are sort of slightly Ruby-focused, some of them, but for the Python people there, I trust that the same premises exist. And I just haven't used Python since, for a long time, so I apologize that I didn't make slides that match. So we're going to look at them and just say, okay, these are tools you've probably picked for your own personal development happiness, but possibly they have consequences, and then we'll go through a much longer list of things to think about over the next year or 2 years of things you should change to. They're going to give your production system a much happier life, which I promise will make you happier. Yes, you can change jobs. But either way, someone's going to have a shitty job, right? So it's best to do the right thing. Okay, so tools with consequences. Tools are built to model there was a problem, there was something that was repetitive. Like my PhD supervisor used to say, if you have to do something 3 times, you should write a tool. She also used to say that the goal of writing a PhD thesis is to make it as boring as possible. So I don't know how much to trust her. But I did make it as boring as possible, and I got a PhD. So, and then I put a red cover on it, because you've got to let something out. Tools. So let's have a look. So I said this a couple of times now. Tools have a purpose. Some sort of thought model was in. When they were built, they were really trying to solve something. But as you use them, you started using them for other things, and they may not have been built for that. Perhaps my favorite is Chef, which is great. I mean, if you had come from before Chef, it solved lots of problems. The thing is, it doesn't solve all the problems. But unfortunately, it's the tool of it's not unfortunately the tool of choice. It's when it comes to thinking about managing servers and managing production, people go, I'm going to use Chef, and then what else do I do? So I went to ChefConf, and I went to ChefConf, and you go through a couple of sessions, and eventually I had this idea. This is just a conference for people who the whole conference was I'm using Chef, and here's all the other stuff I had to do as well. And none of them could say, well, I stopped using Chef. They wouldn't have been invited. So I was a little bit biased there. Well, one of the things I noticed was you can have Chef, and if you've never used Chef, it's better than not using Chef. But it doesn't solve, perhaps for me, the fundamental problem is that if I'm using Chef or Puppet or any of those, I still need to know how to configure MySQL, which is still shit. Well, I don't want to know how to configure that. And there should be a warning saying stop using MySQL. But another one is Ruby. Ruby and this is Ruby, the original Ruby. Ruby, the one that comes from the Ruby people in Japan, which is where Ruby's come from, if you didn't know. Ruby came with as a tool, it came with an idea that develop happiness. What a lovely, that's going to sell tickets to conferences. It's awesome. I mean, Ruby people come with this. The whole ecosystem is around developer happiness. We're this dark era of DSLs and metaprogramming. That was awesome. And, most people have given it up now. Because it's like, how does this work? I don't know anymore. Just methods generated at runtime sound awesome. Makes, I don't know how it works. And so the idea that the priority somehow is how much fun it was to write initially sounds like someone who's never had a production system. And I know that, because that was me. And once you get a production system, you look back and you say, Nicholas, which you wouldn't say. I don't want emails from you about your problem. You say, Nicholas, no. So now an example of the consequence of these sort of thought process, of the ethos that comes with a tool is people like Ruby, they like writing a pretty code. And obviously it's aesthetic. I actually think Python code is equally pretty. But in doing that, they'll say, well, I like pretty code. So you're going to avoid ugly. And I tell you, there's nothing uglier than checking for errors. Like a 3-line method, but one of them made a distributed call. Well, if you make a distributed call to something, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And checking for all of them makes your 3-line method into a 20-line method. That's not pretty. And so it's not that it's not possible, but it's not part of the thought process of the tool. So you've got to fight against the tool. So that's kind of the premise of this slide. Rails itself came with, on the website, which I don't know who visits, but I visited once recently just to get this quote. It said, web development doesn't hurt. It said nothing about life as a production system. And I think, so if you've ever built a Rails app, you type Rails new. Actually, sorry, I do it from your perspective. Rails new sounds I care for you. I did the hand gestures in the correct way. Rails new and the name of the app, and it generates code, etc. I think it should come with a warning at the bottom, like smoking, that says basically, warning, you're about to create a production system. People will use it. They will have expectations on you, that it stays up 24 hours a day, that you will have to take care of it and nurture it. And eventually you might realize that Rails isn't necessarily the thing that's the best thing for a web production system. Have a nice day. And but nonetheless, there's a lot of benefits to Rails. You get faster, started fast. There's the point isn't say not to use Rails, not to use Django, none of these things. It's that to constantly recognize that you made choices to get started faster or happier as a developer. And over time, with the success of the production system, you are going to have to rethink some of those choices for the sake of the fact that you've now got this unit of processing attracting a significant amount of attention in the form of HTTP requests. Engine Yard, which hosts web apps, does a lot of great things around, it optimizes for how fast you can deploy, which I guess is a good thing. It really is. It's great that you can completely describe, use Chef, you can modify your environments, and et cetera, but we have no concept of how fast you can work, the idea of systems of apps. It still has external dependencies. GitHub has to be there if that's where that's no fun. You've got a bug, you want to ship it, GitHub's down. How much fun is that? So one of the things you're going to roll back over time is external dependencies. You're going to bring all those in. All right, so let's go thinking through production. System happiness that allows you to be happy. If you're a Ruby person, this is what I tried to sell for 2 years. I don't know why. I don't know why, sorry. I said sell. It's free. It's not that you sell it. But the idea that you want something that's going to be stable, that's going to use all the resources are available. Forking, Ruby processors might be 100 megs of memory each. How is, I joke at this point often and say, Engine Yard is in the business of selling memory. So whilst I'm going to tell you about JRuby, you just keep on using as much as possible. So true, just keep using, anyway. But it has great tools. I mean, the JVM has some wonderful tools, and there's a very funny Twitter joke going around that it also comes with an example language called Java. Another thing for, you might add is PagerDuty. Wonderful tool. It's going to break the idea that you have this 40-hour-a-week job, which is a very important. The moment you sign up for a job at a web company, you don't get to just be a 40-hour. I don't saying work 168 hours, but you have a production system it's yours. I believe all developers should be part of that rotation. I'm starting to not be into this HTTP as a SOA thing. It's not a lot of visibility, and if we can talk about this. But queuing's allowed you to have more visibility of what's going on in your system. Sending out useful logs. If you can get aggregated logs that are meaningful, now you can find out what's going on from perhaps a user's perspective or whatever it is you want. And first put all the logs into a central place, and then bitch to each other about how shitty they are. And then go back to the production systems and start sending out useful logs to tell a story. Explicit error handling, which for the solution is, I'm not going to say don't use, but Go is interesting. A lot of my thoughts on explicit error handling came from a talk I saw on Go, where he sort of made the distinction between errors and exceptions. And in Ruby, it really is only exceptions that we think about. You raise an exception, Java has the same thing, and but perhaps the idea that if you're trying to make a distributed call and that thing's not there, that's not an exception. That's one of the things could happen. That's an error. Handle it. Do something intelligent with it. Leave exceptions for exceptional circumstances. And so picking Go as a language means that you're going to pick a tool that he keeps showing me numbers that are getting smaller, and I don't like them. And you pick a tool like Go, you're going to have an environment, a tool, a language tool that's going to encourage you to behave and think in this way. It's not going to fight against it to do the right thing. Getting development to be similar to production. You're not going to deploy into production on OS X. There's just room for error. And we will try to get less error, not more. Introducing continuous integration and or manual QA. Right? That makes sense. Perfectly good idea, but it does slow down development. And these are the things you have to give up. And I'm sorry. Building your system such that it tolerates failure. There's a whole book on this. And I just, if I could sell a book for someone else, I think this is a great book. Lots of case studies of, like an airline that was taken down because of like a socket that got blocked. The whole airline got taken down. You laugh. No, actually, you should laugh because it's really funny. But that's happening in your system. And the ability how fast you can debug it, and the fact that it shouldn't happen in the first place. All right, so when you build a feature, have you tested, all right, what does this feature do when the database is down? What does the feature do when it's slow? which is the worst, hardest possible thing, because it's not failing. It's just, so have you put timeouts? And so it talks a lot about client libraries that are often given to you. At least we have open source client libraries. But have they got timeouts in them? Have they all this sort of stuff? And often, I like to talk about a thing called BOSH, and I've done enough talks about it. It's a system that is about, I'll get to the next slide, it first does all this provisioning of things. So Chef is just sort of, once you've got the VMs, putting stuff on them, BOSH owns the whole life cycle of your production system. Has no external dependencies, so everything's baked in, so there's no external packages. And you may or may not use BOSH, but it has a lot of interesting ideas about hardening a production environment. So you might like to keep using Debian, but have your own Debian thing. Build your own packages. Know what's in there, and have control. Don't be down because the Amazon Debian thing's not there. Okay, so finally, this is this idea that you live with a production system. And if you're unhappy with that, yes, the web is a wonderful, cool place. Go and build desktop apps. Go somewhere else. But this is the business we're in. We have to keep these things going. This is the simplest idea I can sort of share with you to get your mind focused around the relationship you have with production, which is, yes, you're going to keep putting features in because people keep wanting them. But we also have to keep fighting against this number and improving it. If you're on the other side of a relationship, you're on the ops side, my thinking is, how can we give developers better tools so that it's easier for them to do the right thing than the wrong thing? So I hope you all have a wonderful life with your production system. Thank you very much. That says that I have no time for questions. Is that what it is?
You can take some time.
Questions. If I'd known that, I would have talked longer. Questions just, involve feelings. I'm good. I'm scary enough.
Are there alternatives for Airbrake? What alternatives do you see for Airbrake?
So I talk to a lot of companies, big companies and small companies, and all of them are saying, yeah, we're building a competitor Airbrake. There is an open source project, I think, called Urbit.
Yeah.
Well, at least you can host yourself and provide resources. There's a couple of other competitors that are starting to come out. Just the sheer volume of traffic they get means that search is... So the way Airbrake basically works, if you want to know, is every error gets stored in an S3 thing. So that's great, except now search is completely out of the question. But yeah, they have billions of things. So yeah, no, I don't know the exact best one. We certainly haven't. We're too scared to move. We'd just rather bitch. We've built, internally engineered, we've built wrappers around the Airbrake to try and search and find stuff, and it's all crap.